Hey all, EC here, and today, I've done quite a few videos about these like top games on this different franchises and apps on Nintendo Switch Online. So today I want to go over the Donkey Kong ones. I want to go over the top games I think on Donkey Kong on Nintendo Switch Online. So obviously this is my take. We're going to go over to get all 5 games on my list, and we'll start with the NES game Donkey Kong. This is obviously the first game on the list. It's the NES version of the arcade classic. This is definitely a well-known game. Everyone knows Donkey Kong is one of the most iconic games of all time. This game does have some like cut content that was cut from the NES version, despite the NES version just being a part of the arcade version. But besides that, it's just genuinely still a fun game to this day. Even if you're not a fan of these older school sort of like arcade style games, it is still worth checking out just to obviously experience where Donkey Kong came from and obviously the birth of the Mario franchise. And with that said, the second game on our list is actually Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong Jr. is the follow-up, it's a sequel to Donkey Kong, and you basically play as Donkey Kong Jr., his son, and you basically got to try and save your dad from Mario, who has captured him and put him in a cage, and you basically do a lot of climbing and jumping and all that sort of stuff. It's actually, in my opinion, one of the better Donkey Kong games as well, especially when you compare it to like Donkey Kong 3, because like, why did they make that game? That game is just kind of bad. Right, so that's the first 2 on our list, and then we're going to scroll down. Look at the next one. So the next one we have is Donkey Kong Land. This is obviously a Game Boy game. This is made by the same team who made Donkey Kong Country. And this game is basically Donkey Kong has actually betrayed you. He doesn't think that Donkey Kong is actually worthy of obviously his title and what he's done. So he decides to work with King K. Rool to test Donkey Kong to see if Donkey Kong can actually, perform to the standard that he wants for Donkey Kong. So obviously, as Donkey Kong, you've got to obviously go through and go back across the island, and you got to try and collect all your bananas and get all your bananas back that King K. Rool has stolen, because obviously, it's a trial, it's a test to see if Donkey Kong is actually worthy to be the next. I think it's the next guardian of the bananas, whatever, is what it is. The next game after that, is, to be fair, this Donkey Kong Land, by the way, is kind of dated by today's standards because obviously it was originally developed for the Game Boy. But it's not a bad game in any means, and it is definitely worth checking out today, just to see how obviously the legacy is created for Donkey Kong as a game. And then you actually look at Donkey Kong 94, which was the next game on our list, which is basically the first game in the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series. I know, crazy. It starts out as like an arcade conversion, so like the Game Boy version of the arcade game, but obviously different graphical style and whatever. And then you actually realise there's actually levels where it sort of becomes more like a platforming game, where you've got to try and unlock different parts of the level and defeat Donkey Kong, because obviously captures Pauline. It's not a bad game, it's definitely interesting. It's also nicknamed Donkey Kong 94 by people who have actually, played the game, so that's quite interesting as well, because the game is just called Donkey Kong, which, gets a bit confusing when you got Donkey Kong the arcade game, Donkey Kong on the NES, which is a version of the arcade game, then you got Donkey Kong on the game, which is a completely new game. And the last game on our list is Donkey Kong Country. This one is obviously going to come. Everyone knew Donkey Kong Country was going to be on this list, because it's Donkey Kong Country is genuinely one of the game series that put Donkey Kong back on the map after years of no one caring. Now, Donkey Kong Country, it's developed by Rare. Rare obviously made their names known with this game. It was this game that sort of brought them back to the spotlight for a lot of people. So, with this game, you obviously play as Donkey Kong, or you can play as Diddy Kong. You can play as Diddy Kong, I believe it's in multiplayer. And, there's 100 plus levels where you can obviously travel the world. And you got to obviously defeat King K. Rool and his reptile army of, I think it's called Kremlins. This is genuinely a fun game. This is the game that basically Nintendo keeps coming back to. Nintendo keeps coming back to the Donkey Kong Country series when it comes to Donkey Kong. And it shows, because these games are just genuinely great. But Donkey Kong Country 1, it's the best game on the SNES when it comes to, obviously, Donkey Kong library. And I genuinely think this is a great game. And I hope that, they keep the series going. And, maybe one day we might see Rare redevelop the game. You never know, because they are quite friendly with Microsoft now. Microsoft seems to get on quite well. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe, like, share, comment, turn notifications. I've been EC. What is your favourite Donkey Kong game? Let me know in the comments down below. Obviously, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.